Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the podcast today. You're in the middle of our brand new series. We've titled it a lot of things. One of the working titles was I Got to My New Church, and so did the pandemic. And I'm so blessed to have my friend, Pastor Philip Miller, with us today. Philip is the pastor at the Moody Church, which is by nearly every measuring stick I can find, the oldest megachurch in the United States, and also the longest running megachurch in the United States. So they've had megachurch standards for a long time. That means they were the first to do a lot of things. Like I want to ask you, Philip, in a little while about answering machines and Bible studies for kids and some of the cool things the church has done over the years. But you guys were the first church I know of, and I think maybe the first church in the country to actually hold a business meeting to elect a new pastor in a virtual setting. And so I thought it'd be cool to talk to you. I'd love for you to just share a little bit of your story. We've known each other for several years now, and then let's talk about what you're learning as you're pastoring new church in unprecedented waters.
Well, that sounds like a fun conversation, William, and it's great to be here with you and your listeners. And yeah, I remember that was a weird. This whole thing started back in March. We were that was when we came out to candidate here at Moody, and it was funny. The pandemic kind of had hit, and we were about a week and a half into the first initial like lockdown that was happening, kind of all over. Different cities were taking the lead. I was coming from the West Coast, and so the airports were just dead. I remember I got on a plane on a Wednesday, and there were 12 people on the plane, and they didn't have first class, so that was a bummer because I would have snuck up there. But it was crazy. It just came on out here, and yeah, we did everything virtually. So we had a meeting with the elders that was in person, but then the Moody Church has kind of a leadership council, sort of an intermediate layer of leadership that needed to vote on me. And so we did that on Friday, and that was all virtual. It was weird, camera driven, and they used like Survey Monkey to like collect and tabulate the results, which is crazy. And that passed. And then on Sunday we had a congregational meeting, and there were hundreds and hundreds of people live streaming an interview and my preaching, and the room was completely empty. and we had the vote, and everything went through. But it was the weirdest thing, because when it was all said and done, and I had said yes, and they had said yes, and all that sort of thing, I'd still only met like 50 people at the church. So it was crazy. It was so weird.
Wow. So like, take me from March till now. We're recording this in December, so you've had 9 months.
Yeah,
Your whole honeymoon has been a
it's a
virtual honeymoon.
virtual.
That's a depressing metaphor. A virtual honeymoon. Who wants that?
Yeah, yeah. It's certainly, you have sort of expectations that it's this is the second sort of pastoral transition I've done. And that first year is just a sweet time. Everyone's excited. Everyone's, so I get cards and I get emails, and I've met a few people, but it's not the same thing as being in the room. Yeah, we have stayed virtual. So one of the difficulties we have is we're right in the urban core of Chicago, and Chicago, is handling the pandemic, pretty carefully, and so there's pretty stringent restrictions in place here. And so one of the things we're just trying to think through is, okay, how do we reopen a 3,800 seat auditorium in downtown Chicago? And that room doesn't feel very alive until you have about 1,000 people in it. And so, just having a couple hundred people doesn't work. So we've had to keep the services virtual for now. And we think that's the best way to love our neighbors. But as a pastor, it is definitely a frustrating reality to week after week just look at a camera, and it clicks on, clicks off, and you kind of go home, and you don't get that immediate feedback or sense of connection with the community, and that's been really limiting.
I I
What?
I, I used to have a hard enough time when I was a wonderful Presbyterian church, but fairly traditional church. the early service tended to draw, I would call them our introspective congregants. like I could preach, 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 and it was, and yeah, and they were good people. They were taking it all in, but I couldn't preach
Yeah.
without some feedback. Have you had to learn new skills for preaching when you're not getting feedback from faces?
Yeah, that's so I'm extroverted. And so part of my process is I'm reading the audience, I'm playing off the energy in the room. And so it is hard. You get up, you look at that camera, and you just kind of have to bring effort to the moment and just sort of kind of power through, because you don't get the feedback, you don't get the reinforcement, you don't have energy coming back that you can sort of feed off of. And so that's very limiting. Part of me is just learning, okay, that's how that feels. It just feels like that. And I noticed early on there's kind of a wall. About 15 minutes into my sermon, I could feel like the energy where that's as far as I can sprint, energy wise, and just recognizing that wall is going to come, and not to lose confidence, but just to kind of like plow through it and keep going. Yeah, that's been a new skill set. Another one is, when you tell a joke or something in a live environment, you wait to the reaction, and then you find out, did the joke work? Did it not work? Did I bomb it? And then you have to clean it up if you bombed it up, like all that kind of stuff. But now it's like, I'll do a joke, but I can't pause and leave room for laughter because there may not be any. And so it's funny because I think my jokes are a little more subtle, and I might just have like a little like half smile acknowledgement, or like a little moment, but then just keep going, right? Because you can't leave space for those things. So I think I've also maybe adjusted a little bit of my communication. I recognize people are seated; they're probably sitting on their living room couch. They're with their families. It's a much less church sort of feel, and more of a living room feel. And so I think I've tried to adjust my preaching to be a little bit more conversational in this season as well. So those are some of the micro adjustments. But
Yeah, well, and it would be negligent on my part if I've got the pastor of the Moody Church here to not talk about how you've treated the text, and has that changed? Like, I would imagine you had a plan for first year I'm at a new church, I'm going to preach on XYZ. Like, has that shifted? Have you found yourself doing different sermons? Are the series different? Are you going through a book of the Bible? Like, is the length of the message different? Walk me through the art of treating the text during this time.
that's a great question. So when I was getting ready to start here, I started July 1. My first sermon was July, I think it was the 5th, right after 4th of July. And so we were trying to figure out, okay, how do we launch this? And normally you sort of want to come out of the gate with energy and just sort of, start with a bang. And but I was just feeling like this incredible weight of the pandemic. If you remember, it feels like a year ago or a world ago. But like at first we thought it was like 2 weeks. Remember that? We were like, we're going to flatten the curve, and it's by Easter, we'll be back,
Surely
and then
Mother's
surely Mother's Day. That's right. That's right. And then then all of our expectations, got throttled, and things started dying one at a time. Right. So Easter sort of died, and then Mother's Day died, and then Father's Day died, and then 4th of July sort of died. And I realized we're grieving. Like, we don't have a good label for it, but we're going through nationally and worldwide, we're going through collective grief. And I thought, we've got to help people grieve, because grief, the grief cycle starts with denial, and then it turns angry, and then it's bargaining, and then it's depression. And we were going through all those stages. If you think back over the summer, and the nation, and the outrage, and the anger, and the politics, and all, we were grieving as a people. We didn't know what to do with it. And so I sat down and I said, okay, I need to help people grieve. And so what we did is we went to the book of Ruth in the Old Testament, and we walked with Ruth and Naomi through their grief. and trusting in the providence of God, that he had a hope and a future for them, and that he could redeem their stories and their pain. And so that's how we started, which was sort of not the way you would normally think about starting. I'm going to start my brand new pastorate in a series on grief, but it felt right for the moment that we were walking through. So that's how we began.
I listened to several messages in that series, and it's so well done. And I think what I appreciated most, Philip, was I heard in your voice your own grief.
Hmm.
And maybe I'm overreading, but it sounded like you were trying to let me, hey, I'm grieving this too. I'm starting an
Yeah,
after it. And I mean, is that the case? I mean, you have any,
totally.
if it was the case, you got any tips for how to share without oversharing in those kind of ways?
Yeah. Well, it totally was. It totally was sort of my own therapy in public, because I was detaching from a ministry family that I loved, a staff community in Washington State that I'd pastored for 7 years, and um, that's where my friends were, and that's where normalcy was, and that was our house, and that was our kids and their school and their friends, and all the normal things that we would normally run to in the middle of a pandemic. When the world gets crazy, you kind of run home and you have a stable place. Like, we didn't have that either, because we were moving, and so I think, yeah, for me, I was going through grief, and I think that probably helped the maybe emotional intelligence in the communication, just recognizing, like, that's where I was at, and
Let
so carrying the weight of that helped me.
let me park there for a minute. Um, where did you go? Where did you find like home when you're at a brand new home? Because I'm guessing there are listeners who are in a brand new ministry or are feeling a little alienated and there's nowhere to run to, so to speak. Like what
Yeah.
did you tell me about your journey and what we might learn from it?
Oh man. Well, I don't know that I did it all particularly well, but I think it comes down to, I think of like a foundation of a house, not one that's on a slab, but like those pier and beam foundations where you have these fixed points where you drill down to bedrock, right? And I think in life we tend to have, I don't know, 10 or 15 pylons that we're driving down, and we think they all matter, but about 95% of them really don't. Like, they feel stable, but they're not. So I have my health, but you won't always have your health. I have my family. Well, I won't always have my family. I have my job. Well, I won't always have my job. I have my community. I won't always have that, right? So I think in a pandemic, some of those pylons they get wiped out. And then you have all this weight that you've been placing on those things, and you have to transfer the weight to something more durable. And of course, we know theologically, Christ is our foundation, right? He's the rock. He's the firm foundation. He's the one who never leaves us, never forsakes us, never lets us go. His word is trustworthy and true, and his love is absolute and durable. But we don't learn that, how sufficient and how all sufficient his love is, until other things get stripped away. And I think in this season for me, when people change jobs, it's usually just the job. They don't change their house. They don't change their church community. They don't change their schools. But when you're a pastor, you change all that stuff at the same time.
Mm.
And when you do that in the midst of a pandemic, you change even more things. And I think this season has been one where we Krista and I and the kids have felt like almost every single one of those pylons got wiped out. We
Wow.
had some friends, some mentors, some close people that we obviously pull close to and we lean on, and we have family and we have those supports. But in many ways, it's a season where we've just learned that God is faithful and he's enough, and that he will hold us and keep us. And a little anecdote, I was talking to my 10-year-old daughter, her name is Claire. And the other day, this is probably a month ago, and we were talking about Thanksgiving coming up, and um, and things that we could be thankful for. And she said this to me. She said, "Dad, I'm actually really thankful we moved, because when I lost all of my friends and had to leave them behind, I discovered I have a friend who I will never lose, and that's Jesus."
Wow.
And and as a father, I just, like, my little tear in my eye kind of moment, right? But I was like, wow. I mean, she's 10 and she gets it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's been the core of it for me, William, is really learning the sufficiency of Christ. Of course, having relationships like mentors and friends and other people to lean on has been invaluable. Extended family, that sort of thing. But more than anything, we've discovered that Christ is enough.
Wow. Wow. It'd be interesting to see, church attendance for places that are open is not anywhere near where it was a year ago.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to see where spiritual maturation is once we're able to see each other again. Because I'm guessing that's a story that a lot of people will be able to. I mean, our family devotions have been better than they've probably ever been in the last 9 months, and that's on me as a dad. But when your kids are watching the news, and you just see them when they watch the news, you're just like, you can see like the news is trying to create enough terror to keep you watching. that's the point.
Yeah.
whatever news channel you listen to, and you sit down at the dinner table, you better have some hope. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
super, super helpful. So
It's interesting. James, in James chapter 1, talks about, trials that come into life, and they're like stress tests, right? You get on the treadmill and you find out how your heart is. The stress test of life comes along and you find out what's going on the inside, and it reveals where we're at. And so I'm in agreement. I think there are people who are going to come out of this pandemic with really deep roots in Christ and a deep trust in him. And there's going to be people who come through this pandemic and they find themselves more uprooted than anything else. And so there's going to be a lot of spiritual work on the back end of this, I think.
So talk to me a little bit about, you're at a brand new congregation. You can't go meet people. How are you engaging? How do you, what are some things
Yeah.
you do work or don't work even? That'd be more helpful. Like,
Yeah.
how are you engaging?
So we've had to do a lot of one-directional communication, right? Lots of videos, lots of content, lots of pushing things out. I think people in general feel like they know me and my family pretty well. We did little interviews of the kids and we posted those online. We did, family videos. We did devotionals. We've done lots of one-way communication. That doesn't help me as much, but I feel like it allows people to feel like they know me, and that's huge. We've really leaned into our prayer time on Wednesday evenings. We do a church-wide prayer, kind of YouTube and Zoom prayer time, and we've even done a few of those in person, outdoor, socially distanced and all this stuff. A couple weeks we had outdoor services, and we had 6 of these. We had to limit them to 100 a piece. Actually, I think there were 8. There were 8 of them, 4 on 2 separate weekends, so 8 altogether. And it was kind of a get to meet Philip and his family. We stood there and we got to meet people, and so all of it's inadequate, but it's better than nothing. And so we've been leaning into those things, and then it's been kind of cool on our staff. Because we can't get large groups together. I've been doing a lot of one-on-ones and connecting with people, and that's been pretty healthy and good, and allowed me to get to know people. And then we've been connecting with families, kind of one family at a time. Which is interesting, because normally what you would do is you do a big reception and you'd meet 650 people and shake their hands and forget everything you learned, because it's just overwhelming, right? It's almost better because the expectations are, well, we can't do that. So it's got to be slow, but it has to be much more personal. And so there's, in a sense, I almost like it better because I can actually get to know people,
Yeah.
family by family. It's just going to take forever. So
It's going to take forever. And I, a line that I've stolen recently from a headmaster of a school I was watching give a presentation, and he said, "Let me just ask for your forgiveness on the front end. This is my first pandemic."
that's right.
That's awesome. Like it buys grace immediately. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
it's my first pandemic too. You're right. So
Yeah. Everybody understands that.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so
What is weird though, that, and I just, I've just realized this is like, your first year in a ministry, you're just trying to experience everything for the first time. Well, how do we do things? What's this like? I'm going to have to go through that twice, because this first year is unlike any other year in the history of Moody Church, right? So at some point, we're going to be rebooting and rebuilding things that everyone else remembers, but I've never experienced.
wow.
And that's going to be weird because, whenever we do that, it's going to be the first time I may have been here 2 or 3 years, but it'll be the first time we've done this event, which is just a weird reality.
Wow. Wow. Anything you tried that hasn't worked? You're like, hey, learn from my mistake.
Um, I don't know that we've had any catastrophic failures. I think what our attempts at reopening, like we've had, we have a lot of Sunday schools and small groups, and we've had people gathering in homes. We've had people gathering in regulated classrooms with, they can only be in this space and they have to leave through this entrance and that sort of thing. So we're trying to leverage our facility that way. And I think that's been a mixed results. I mean, I think people were really excited in the front end. They're like, oh, let's get together. And then we did have some COVID that, outbroke in some small areas. And so then we had to throttle it back. And I would say that's, kind of a mixed bag. We're trying to do the whole hybrid thing, where we're doing some in person and some online. And honestly, that's hard, to do well on both fronts. But we're learning and we're getting better. But I think we're all doing that right now, right? We're trying to figure out what does this look like and how do you keep doing ministry in a really weird time.
Forgive us. It's our first pandemic.
It's a good line. I'm going to steal that. Yeah.
Well, I know. It's so interesting recording this in December. I was thumbing through YouTube, YouVersion this morning, looking for another Advent devotional idea for the kids. And I ran across Christmas in Lamentations. Never in my life have I heard it.
And you paused, didn't you? You were like, maybe I should do that.
I actually started it. I'm doing it already. Like, that's actually a really good thing. But I think we're all just kind of figuring it out as we go. And I'm guessing a lot of people are going to have to go to a first post in the next year, and it's not going to be the same for a few years. So any advice to people that are getting ready to make a move or don't even know it yet, but might make a move? What would you say to somebody entering a new place when it's just different than it's ever been?
Yeah, I think calibrating expectations is huge. What I'm kind of a romantic by nature, and so like I can kind of visualize like, oh, this will be great, and then it's not going to be great. Not everything's going to be great. I think when you make a career move or a pastoral move, there's a natural excitement, right? A fresh start, new ministry horizons, new people, new opportunities. All of that's really, really good. I think just recognizing it's not going to feel normal. It's not going to be normal. But in that, there's a huge opportunity for leadership, right? Because everyone is in the same stew of, I have no idea what to do. And so in that vacuum, a leader gets to shape the future and say, here's what is important right now. And I think the role of shepherding our staff our leaders. We're all hurting. We're all running on fumes. We're all grieving. We're all exhausted. That's everyone. And the strongest people you know are probably the most exhausted people. And so as a leader, just I think recognizing those feelings are going to be in your life, and they're real, they're normal. And we've got to build ourselves up, right? I've got my bicycle here behind me in my office, and I get on that and I ride, and it's good for my health. And I have to be very disciplined about that because I don't feel like it. And but we have to be healthy, and we've got to keep enduring and play the long game, because one day this pandemic will end, and one day the church will, come out of the shadows, and things won't come back to normal. They'll come back to whatever the future is.
That's right.
And but what we do know is that Jesus is building his church even now. The gates of hell will not prevail against it. And so there is a beautiful thing that Christ is doing, and I want to be there for that. And I do think this is a giant stress test on the church and on our character. And I do think the Lord is using this to make us stronger and more resilient. And we will come out positioned to do some really cool things. And so it's a huge opportunity. And so I would encourage leaders just to lean in to this space and recognize it's going to be awkward. It's going to be weird. It's not going to feel like you would expect it to. But we need to lean in a season like this and play the long game.
That's really good. I think what resonated with me most in what you said was realize it's not all going to be good. And I think what I'm hearing from leaders of churches is realize that all of your people are not going to think it's good. You could do all the right things in the world. And the passage that came to my mind recently that I can't get rid of is, I believe it's in Ezra. It's around the 3rd chapter or so, but this is when the second wave of exiles are coming home from captivity, right? And they come back to Jerusalem. The temple's been rebuilt, and the new temple is smaller than what the exiles remembered. And they get there, and of course they're just all torn up. There's this little mini temple. It's not what it used to be. And I think pastors are going to have some of that. And then you have some people that were so excited that there was a temple, and they're like, "Yay, we got a temple!" And the verse that haunts me in there is, it says, "And the sounds, they cried aloud out of sorrow because of this small temple, and the shouts of those praising and the cries of those crying were mixed together in a noise that was heard all through the land." And I'm like, oh, wow, that might be the noise we're all going to hear for a while. It might be this mixed bag. And I don't know, it just came to mind when you mentioned that.
Yeah, it's Paul's language, sorrowful yet always rejoicing. Or, the Holy Night has that line, the weary world rejoices.
Oh my gosh, if I had a nickel for everybody that's doing their Advent series with that line. My favorite song. And
that's this year. It's just a weary year.
Well, and I just a word of encouragement to pastors. I mean, you guys know this, but yes, it's a weary year, but you know what? The weary world that saw Christ come into the world hadn't heard God speak in 400 years. We've been through 9 months. So right.
I was talking to somebody the other day, and someone was like, "This year is just the worst." And I paused for a moment. I was like, not even close.
No,
not even close. You know, when you look back over the Black Plague was way worse, right?
And killed 1/3 of Europe.
Wars. And wars and civil wars and discord, and just the world has been, dealt with havoc for many different seasons. This is just the one we're in.
That's right.
And God is faithful in these things, just like he always has been.
Well, I keep getting thank you notes from your congregation for whatever small role we played in helping you guys find each other. So you must be doing something right there. People don't take time to write notes to consultants unless they're bad notes. so you way to go for being there. And you can't feel that connection from the notes we're getting, but you should know that your people appreciate you, and you're doing a good
That's
work.
awesome.
Yeah,
That's
and
awesome.
I just want to thank you in the middle of the time where we're not all just pastors are working harder than they've ever worked, and they're burning out, and here you are cutting out time to talk to us and help an audience adjust as they might be moving. So thank you, Philip. We really appreciate you and your ministry.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad to do this, and again, probably therapeutic for me just to do this with you. So thanks for letting me.
Absolutely. And those of you listening, there are other episodes in this series. I hope it's helpful to you. We've kind of done a new strategy for 21 where we're dropping series like Netflix. We're not doing just the once a week thing. I think the pandemic taught me that. So check out some of the new series that we're putting out this year. And if you want to get show notes to learn more about Philip or the Moody Church and what they've done, then just go to vandercast.com and subscribe there, and we'll be sure to send you some good information. So thanks again for being with us, and hope to see you soon.